Hi everyone.
We're back and running with a brand new season. Woo!
What will we be talking about today?
I don't know. What are we talking about today, people?
Well, today we're talking about the philosophy called Confucianism and how it affects the people and the culture of Korea.
Well, Confucianism values are like quite the hot stuff nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, it's basically the reason why the word like 꼰대 exists.
Like for your information, the word "onde" is kind of like the equivalent word to boomer in English. So, FYI, and Dana, back to you.
So today we're going to be talking about this, and let's dig into the episode.
Now, about Confucianism, Santino, what is Confucianism? I guess we have to like explain it to our listeners first.
Okay, so before we talk about Confucianism, we need to get this clear. Confucianism can be very, very different depending on the era or the country and the philosophers themselves. So it could be very confusing and different from what you guys will know, as this podcast will be heard around the world. So put that in mind before we start our podcast. But the Confucianism that we're going to talk about today is mainly about, I have no idea how to say this in English, but it's, I believe it's called Neo-Confucianism.
Yeah, 성리학.
Yeah, that is called 성리학 in Korean.
Oh, can I explain a bit about the history of 성리학? Well, Dana will, talk about like the entirety of the history of Confucianism in Korea. But I just want to dive a little bit into Neo-Confucianism because it's the most important part of Confucianism that affects Korea at the moment. Neo-Confucianism is like, I guess, a branch of Confucianism that comes from China, actually, like Confucianism does. Let me dive a little bit deeper into Neo-Confucianism. So Confucianism was adopted into Korea naturally along with the spread of Chinese characters. Dana will explain more about this. Do you want to say something?
After you
Okay.
and your explanation.
So even though Confucianism wasn't really important to Korean culture in its beginning stages, the Joseon dynasty decided to adopt Confucianism as its like main revolving system. So the Joseon dynasty had a really, really close relationship with Confucianism, and the country was just built around it. Neo-Confucianism was created during the Song dynasty in China, and it was actually created because Buddhism was growing too large in China. So as many of you guys may know, Buddhism is actually Indian. It originates in India. And because of that, the Chinese thought it was foreign. And some of them really didn't like the idea of China revolving around like a foreign religion. Similarly, in Korea, the dynasty before Joseon, called Goryeo, which is the origin of the word Korea, was a country that was built around Buddhism, which is why a lot of the people who studied Confucianism in Korea really liked the idea of having a Neo-Confucianism root that was based in China instead of India. And the people who studied Neo-Confucianism were very big fans of Chu, who created Neo-Confucianism. Chu was a guy who literally criticized Buddhism so badly. He roasted them, and the people in Korea were huge fans. And Lee Seong-ge is the person who founded Joseon. And a lot of these Neo-Confucianists happen to be supporters of this person. Joseon was a country that was made through a coup because Lee Seong-ge and his troops were ordered to fight, but then he, I guess, turned around and attacked the kingdom instead, which is probably the polar opposite of what they intended to do. And because of Joseon's Neo-Confucianism-based government and ideologies lasted for the entirety of its existence, Neo-Confucianism basically transformed further within the Korean peninsula, and it made a really unique society that still affects us, the people living in Korea, to this day. After all, it hasn't been very long since the Joseon dynasty was felled.
I mean, Olivia's explanation was enough, but I have a little more prepared, providing you guys with more examples that are related to Korea about Confucianism. So going back to when Confucianism came into South Korea. Confucianism came into South Korea before the era of three kingdoms, known as Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, but was only used to decipher old documents or for diplomatic purposes. In Silla, 선비s, which are basically people who work in the palace or who have like who have passed a test called 과거. Yeah.
And they're like these prestigious people.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Korea
Aristocrats.
basically love them.
So in Silla, these 선비s with wealthy or prestigious backgrounds and highly educated students of 국학 usually studied Confucianism in order to go to China and pass a particular kind of exam, 빈공과, because they could use the record that they passed that exam to become an aristocrat and work at the palace. And when did Confucianism start to flourish? It was not until the Joseon dynasty that Confucianism began to substantially affect the political environment of South Korea. During the Goryeo dynasty, Confucianism made its way to dominating the country by holding an annual standardized test called 과거 to evaluate students' knowledge on Confucianism. Choechung also built 9 schools dedicated to studying Confucianism called 구제. There were hyangyos too, a type of school teaching Confucianism to students in rural areas or the outskirts of the nation. Confucianism was the nation's ideology by the time the Joseon dynasty ruled. In the beginning of the Joseon dynasty, kings placed hyangyos, rural schools that teach Confucianism, in every block of every province in the entire country. However, Confucianism was only used for political reasons. For example, kings read Jure to become a better king. Every aristocrat had to learn Confucianism, but mainly for palace duty. As time went by, the Joseon dynasty was in its Middle Ages, and there was a growing conflict between two clans differing in the way they interpreted Confucianism. With each purporting that the other is wrong, this conflict never seemed to end. At its peak, the conflict led to 4 tragic, bloody happenings where one party won the conflict and quote-unquote got rid of the other party to dominate the palace. Confucianism finally started to wane as Joseon became more modernized. Today, Confucianism is hardly seen as the predominant ideology of South Korea.
Well, yeah, before we move on to the controversy regarding Confucianism and also the problems it has in the current 21st century, well, let me get this straight. Well, Confucianism, in its essence, prioritizes values such as harmony, family, and loyalty. So even though we are kind of have the basic mood of criticizing Confucianism and its dark sides in the 21st century, well, we would like to inform you that it is actually a very a philosophy with a very good heart overall. Well, these values are represented by what we call the 5 consonants, which is the fundamental, the principle to the theory of Confucianism. Now, these includes humaneness, justice, rights, knowledge, and faithfulness. These 5 consonants and values are the core prioritized values that the philosophy of Confucianism urges all people to have. And by the way, there are also other numerous core values, the most important ones being loyalty to one's king or lord, a moral compass or self-righteousness, and filial piety. Well, some of these, let's be honest, didn't age well, especially in the 21st century. But once again, don't get me wrong, the philosophy itself is based on the belief that human beings are born good in nature and wills to guide its followers to live an altruistic, giving, forgiving lives overall. There is a lot of written work regarding Confucianism too, hence the reason why it's one of the most major Oriental philosophies, religion, whatever you call it, beside Taoism and Buddhism, as Olivia has previously mentioned. Well, there isn't a problem with the belief and the philosophy itself, but we have observed pretty much problems going on within the 21st century and quite a lot of controversies surrounding this concept called Confucianism. And are there any people here willing to speak about it and have a little discussion about what controversy in the modern world Confucianism is bringing up?
Well, I have something to say, certainly, because I thought, before I was preparing for this episode, I actually thought that Confucianism was really useless in Korean society. How about you? How do you guys think about that?
Well, I feel like Confucianism, while some parts of it seem really outdated, in its essence, it's not, it can't be considered useless because the truth is a country was built around it and survived for quite a long time.
So what I got to know while researching about Confucianism is that Confucianism, in its essence, has nothing wrong with it. And the way it has progressed to be applied into our society was what became the problem.
Definitely.
Yeah, so Confucianism might seem overly inflexible and dependent on rules a little too much. For example, you guys know the 병자호란, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
About our listeners may not be familiar, so could you explain like a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, the 병자호란 is when the Qing dynasty attacked Joseon because we continued to serve the Ming dynasty, which was waning in power and in hostile relations with the Qing. And we were serving the Ming dynasty because, according to Confucianism, we have to serve the superior country of our
Right.
country. And we weren't able to get rid of that ideology. And so we were just sticking on to Ming dynasty, which was failing in power.
And like I said, Confucianism, especially Neo-Confucianism, was really developed because of to build that China-centric ideology. And because of it, everyone believed, even in Korea, believed that the world revolved around China, which meant that the current power in China, which was the Ming Dynasty, had to be upheld by the Koreans.
But the truth is that if it weren't for Confucianism, we wouldn't have been attacked by the Qing dynasty because
Definitely.
we wouldn't be serving Ming dynasty so fervently. So like this, there were times when Confucianism made Chosun made some stupid or like inflexible decisions based on Confucianism. But
Right.
still, Confucianism was very important in our society because Confucianism didn't initially start out like this. Like start out by like being very inflexible, rigid, and deemed useless by every people. So I believe the reason Confucianism is portrayed as a hindrance to society's growth is because it is distorted. Like think about the true messages of Confucianism. The core lesson Confucius aims to deliver through all of his sayings is yin, which means the mind of loving other people. Confucius believed that rather than trying to manipulate others and measuring everything when it comes to relationships, people should begin every relationship with the love and respect towards the person you are bonding with. And that is why Confucianism accentuated manners so much. The love towards your ancestors, families, teachers, and upperclassmen is what starts a truly meaningful relationship. That was the reason why our ancestors adhered to the ideology, because it was such a heartwarming way to treat others and maintain society, not because they were a bunch of dum-dums.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I also think that it teaches us the lesson. While like philosophies of following philosophies itself and following the beliefs itself of a certain philosophy is certainly good, because in this case, Confucianism is also about like the betterment of all human beings and like the
Right.
altruism, the giving. But however, one should not be like too focused and like too focused on following every rules that the philosophy like tends you to suggest everybody to follow. If in that case, because like a philosophy is not perfect, it can philosophies can be very like philosophies can be very restrictive in certain very like certain areas, especially in certain areas such as like women rights and also other parts of the society which are very valuable to us right now in the 21st century. My belief and this lesson what teaches us is that although believing the philosophy itself is okay, being too focused on following every part, like integrating every part of the rules into the society, can be a little bit overboard. Like
Right, and
Yeah.
that should be up to individuals to decide for themselves, not imposed by like a whole country like Korea or China did.
Kind of like fun historical background about Qing dynasty's invasion. There was like a really big conflict or like a debate between should I call them vassals in the what do you call it Namhan fortress, should I call it? So there was like when the Qing dynasty swarmed into Korea, we had very little time to like fight back, or we had very little power to fight back actually. So our king was actually like stuck in the Namahan fortress, and they were just fighting and fighting and just
Right.
for about like 47 days, and like yeah, resources were almost like all depleted.
yeah. And in that situation, the moderate type of vassals, so the vassals that do not really follow Confucianism by heart. They suggested the king to like surrender to the emperor of the Qing dynasty, but the very important part is the radical type of vassals actually demanded to fight till death to Qing. They actually called the Qing barbarians because
Right. Yeah, they did.
they kind of attacked the Ming dynasty, which there was serving as a king or like a father. So they called Qing barbarians, and they called it very, very unworthy to just surrender and give up. So I believe this historical event shows kind of like the negative part of radical neo Confucianism. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting historical event to mention.
Yeah, and also like in conclusion, like to top it all off, like in the 21st century, due to like the very rapid rate of development that Korea has shown in like the past several decades, especially for about like a duration of 70 years, the old generations still have Confucianism values like rooted in their minds, while the younger generations are more of like free from the restriction of
Yeah,
Confucianism philosophies.
definitely.
And I believe like that is the reason why generational gaps and generational conflicts between in Korea is such a huge issue and a more severe issue nowadays overall. And I believe that Confucianism, while it is good as a philosophy, but these parts are very negative for the very development and the future of our society, and certainly is an issue that needs addressing, right?
So to give some examples about how like Confucianism is backfiring in the modern society is you guys know the 선배 문화?
Of course,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
We're also in school, so yeah.
I
we
do have a lot
it.
to say about this. Because I used to live in the US, I had like no idea what the 선배 문화 was in Korea. Basically, it's like talking to your seniors with okay. It's like having a really rigid hierarchy within the working environment or school or whatever. And the upperclassmen or seniors will focus on making their juniors and the younger people miserable, and yeah, things like that just don't really make sense to me because age isn't something that's like a qualification.
And I think that's the effect that Confucianism has had in our society. And when do you think, guys, the Confucianism really started to go wrong in our society? When did it start to go like, when did it start to backfire?
So you mean historically or
Yeah,
in the 21st
historically,
century?
yeah.
Historically, okay, so here's the point. Well, Confucianism was actually Confucianism, while it was actually in China, didn't have much of a problem. But as it came into the Joseon dynasty and became its like core philosophy of running the nation, about like the mid Joseon dynasty, like 200 years, about 200 or years or so after the establishment of the dynasty, that is when like things started to go wrong, because there was like incidents such as the queen passed away, and there was the most controversial topic at that time, because Confucianism was so like it was so restrictive of like the court and the society. The biggest issue at that time, controversy of the court, was how many years do the people have to wear white clothes of a certain fabric, which is like the ceremonial clothes,
Whoops, that was the bell, guys.
which is just kind of like the ceremonial clothes you wear when someone dies. Originally in Confucianism, when like a queen or a mother dies, you have to wear for 3 years. But however, there were like very much controversy whether one party would have to wear it for 3 years, or the other party was like saying, oh, it is perfectly fine to wear it for 1 year. And that while it is unbelievable that could be the biggest controversy of that time, that actually was the biggest controversy, because they were like so indulged deeply in Confucianism philosophies.
And you guys know how during history there were conflicts based about Confucianist manners. So you guys know 붕당 정치, right?
Right,
Yeah.
of course.
The 붕당 politics is like it was an era of conflict between two parties that I mentioned before. There were a series of conflicts that happened that forever damaged how Confucianism could function in South Korea. So during these Pungdang politics, the politicians in the country were really petty about all of the manners written in Confucianism, and they had many debates and many people were slaughtered because of it. And I think that was when really Confucianism started to go south, because these people didn't have to be killed because of the manners. I mean, it was all happened because the people were obsessively like talking and debating about manners, and yeah, it was really pointless.
Yeah, and every time the king took one side, the other people in the other would be killed. People in the other would be, tortured and mistreated and stuff like that. And it really wasn't pretty. And it actually happened for quite a long time during the Joseon dynasty, which, actually made the entire country go downhill.
I mean, I guess it would be a little harsh to say that all the Confucianist manners are petty, but in the current society, in the modern society where people value like efficiency and doing everything fast, it's really hard to always adhere to the manners. And that's why, and also because modern people learn history and they know what happened in history because of Confucianism, it's hard for them to respect that enough as we did before.
I actually have a different view from you guys, because I do not think that Confucianism got like old since the Joseon dynasty. I actually believe Confucianism, we cannot actually define when Confucianism is getting bad. So, for example, say we have rotten milk or something. We don't know when the milk started to go bad, right? So the problem about Joseon dynasties is Confucianism is not the Confucianism itself, but
Right. Absolutely.
yeah. So you want to talk?
No.
So it was like it was the problem of the vassals and kings to use it as a political
Yeah, that is exactly what I'm talking about.
yeah.
And actually, it has to be like described as sort of like a Korean branch of Confucianism, because Confucianism in like the Joseon dynasty, after like centuries and centuries, it kind of like changed into this like very like weird form of like social restrictions and laws, rather than the philosophy it was like originally tended to like strive for. Yeah, it kind of like went downhill from that. It didn't just get old, it went kind of like in the wrong direction as like a restrictive law or restrictive method of politics.
I totally agree.
Yeah, so it didn't get an update for like thousands and thousands of years. So it's just getting old. It's not just the idea is not getting bad.
Right, so I guess we should start wrapping up.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a really meaningful talk because we usually don't talk about Confucianism in class. Yeah.
Usually don't talk about Confucianism in class. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually going back to our roots of our people and our like
Definitely.
philosophies,
And while
is
preparing this
actually a
episode, I
very
learned
meaningful
so much about
experience, isn't
Yeah,
it?
Confucianism.
same. I didn't know it had such
Learned
like
so
a
much about the
complex
Confucian-
history in
same.
Korea.
I didn't know it had such like a complex history in
Yeah, it
Korea.
was very meaningful for me too. As a history geek, it was very meaningful just looking back to history and thinking to myself, when did Confucianism get bad, and when did it turned into a political weapon?
Okay, so yeah, today it's it here for today. Yeah,
That's
I'm
it
getting
for today.
yeah.
That's
I'm
it
mumbling.
for
I don't know why.
today. And thank you so much for listening in, and we'll see you next week. Yeah.
Bye bye, guys.